Hines.
Thank you very much, Chair. Can I turn to Kieran to continue on the theme of research that Dawn was just speaking about a little earlier? And to Kieran, to understand your perspective on the role of the Concussion in Sport group, do you think it's too conservative, perhaps, in its assessment of the available scientific research, or is there just an absence of important scientific research? Is there possibly even a conflict of interest, given that that group is ultimately, I suppose, funded by the sports industry itself? Kieran.
Yeah, I think there is a massive conflict, and there is a problem in rugby at the moment. I've joined the Progressive Rugby group of ex-players who feel that the pace of change is just so slow, it's ridiculous. You heard the very moving words of Monica, and I relate that to my career. When I was playing just think about this, in 1980, the head injury protocol came in that players would stand down for 3 weeks. Now, I had about, I'm going to say 8 to 10, 12 concussions, knocked out on many occasions. And the only time I took 3 weeks off was when I was knocked out on Sky, and we thought it best to not to declare that. But every other time, I either played on with unable to see the ball out of one eye sometimes, sick at half time in the changing rooms. So there was a massive feeling of denial from the players. There was no such thing as education either. No one came in to tell us about, what the damage it could be. So the culture was to stay on the pitch. Nobody left that pitch. And you heard from Monica and Eleanor, the feeling has always been like that. And you can see it now, even though there are protocols in place. Now, this is the thing that really concerns me, is that the game of rugby, since it went professional, has changed hugely. Firstly, the players are bigger and stronger. Okay, so the likes of Jonah Loma, you're like to see all over the place now in the backs. But the rules in the game have changed so that the ball is in play 30% more than it ever used to be. Okay, because of the rule of kicking it outside the 22. So effectively, that means there's more tackles and there's more head injuries. Every single team has a professional defence coach, and their job is to basically cover any space on the pitch. So rugby has now become a game of collision and not evasion. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but that's the truth of it. And the third change in the laws allowing lots of substitutes to come onto the pitch and change the direction of the game means the impact and the intensity is huge. Recently, Italy, they said that they put their best front row on the bench so they could come on the pitch in the second half against a tired front row. And so in the past, so think about it. So we know that there's lots of head injuries. We know that there's more intensity. There's more tackles in a game. And yet we go from a 3-week mandatory break in 1980 and we bring it right down to 6 days in 2011. Okay, so where is the common sense in that? There is no common sense in that. I don't really want to talk about the ex-players because, some of the stories are very upsetting, like Monica said. Some of them suicidal, some of them really struggling with, day-to-day chores. But there is a problem in the sense that what's relevant for the professional game is really not relevant for the amateur game. We want to extend the return to play to at least 14 days, so they do miss 2 matches. We want to limit contact in training like the NFL, and we want to experiment with changing the laws. But what's relevant for the professional game just isn't relevant for the amateur game. And I coach in the amateur game, and I just think there's a massive divide between the two, and I see that as a problem.
I mean, coming on to the amateur game, I mean, where's the most important area of focus? Is it about awareness among GPs and A&E departments about dealing with concussion, or is it in the clubs themselves? Bearing in mind that obviously in a normal amateur game, if there's a doctor present, that will only be coincidence because it's someone's dad or a participant. So how do we deal with that at scale in the amateur game?
It's a real problem because, not every team can afford to have, for example, just, the university third teams or the vets teams, they're not going to have a doctor on the side of the pitch. And effectively what happens in the amateur game, and I accept that, say, my school at St Albans slightly different, and, we would treat it very, very seriously, and other clubs would. But by and large, it becomes a self-assessment whereby the players themselves, with no doctor on the side, are actually self-assessing what's happening. And the mode that they are in exactly the same mode that you see in a Six Nations match, where the player will be knocked out and will stand up and say, I'm not coming off, I'm absolutely fine. And what you see on TV is what you see on every single rugby pitch up and down the country. You know, if you're at university and you're in the third teams, you know, you're not going to go to A&E when someone says you should. You're going to go out with the boys and you're going to train on the following Wednesday, aren't you? So there needs a lot of education, and I think it's the job of the ex-players like myself and other players who are struggling post-rugby to actually try to educate them, because I kind of feel that World Rugby is just too slow to respond to it all.
So, Kieran, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I mean, it sounds from what you've been saying about both the professional game and the amateur game that there are sort of 4 levels that you need to address this at. First of all, there is what protocols there are for dealing with injury. Secondly, there's whether those protocols are actually implemented. Third, there's the wider changes in the game. And fourth, there's a thing about culture and people's, willingness to, I suppose, to challenge or to talk to teammates, say, no, you really shouldn't. You really shouldn't train this Wednesday. Is that a fair assessment that all 4 of those levels need to be addressed simultaneously?
Yeah, they all need to be addressed simultaneously. I mean, we never had players come in to talk to us about what it could be like if we play on with with head injuries. And now that there's living proof of what it's like to live with early onset dementia. I think if someone came to me and told me, the 8 to 10 occasions, I would certainly have left that pitch thinking, I want to have a life after rugby. And I think education is from, you've got to also understand that a lot of the problem comes from the pressures to win. I see it all the time in amateur rugby, even at the age of under 12s, where a team would have their star player in the centre who's running through everyone and scoring the tries. And he'll get a knock in a couple of, say, the 3rd or 4th minute. And the coach and the parents and everyone were like, don't take him off. He's got to stay on. He's got to win us the game. And that is a real problem, because you see it in international rugby and you're going to get it on every pitch up and down the country. And that's a problem.
Kieran, thank you very much. Can I turn to Chris for just a single question? And we may get a chance later on to talk more about sub-concussive injuries, but specifically on children playing football. Now that under-11s aren't meant to head the ball in training, isn't it a bit peculiar that they still can in matches?
Is it peculiar that they still can in matches? Well, I think the view on that is there isn't a lot of heading in matches. I think that's the view. Look, I think where we are across the whole board with these things, and I have to say, and Dawn touched on, has already touched on this. This meeting we're having today should have happened 20 years ago, really, and Dawn has shone a light on this whole football and dementia. And the fact of the matter is the authorities, the FA and PFA, haven't done anywhere near enough. They have ignored, they have shunned, they have turned their back on what has been a massive issue. Hundreds of players have died, my father included. He wasn't a big household name. He died, and thousands, and we're not just talking about the professional game here. We don't even know what has happened in the amateur game. And this is something we need to deal with, and deal with now. Now, there are, even if you don't agree with any of the research, which there is out there, the Willie Stewart research, there are simple preventative measures which we can put in place now, which can help generations to come. And I don't know whether you're aware of the permanent concussion substitution issue in football at the moment, but this is one of the areas which must change, and must change immediately. IFAB, they should immediately ratify temporary concussion replacements rather than the permanent concussion replacements, because the permanent concussion replacements at this moment in time, they don't have the players' welfare and health at heart with that. And secondly, clubs should limit heading at all levels, including professional, to a maximum of 20 headers per session in training and minimum of 48 hours between sessions. Lessen the load. And this is something through the Daily Mail Charter, which they have brought out, which needs to happen. And we don't need to keep having meetings about this. This needs to happen immediately. Hundreds, if not thousands, of players have died from dementia. And if we don't get on top of this now, then this is just going to carry on. Hundreds and thousands more will die from this, and it will affect my generation. It's affected my father's generation. We haven't done anywhere near enough, and it's really important that the government take ownership of this, because the FA and the PFA haven't done anywhere near enough. They haven't been interested in it because it doesn't benefit them in any way, shape or form. Gordon Taylor, who's stepping down now, has blood on his hands. And we have to recognise this, and we can't keep talking about this. There are things we can do, preventative measures, which we need to put in place, and you need to take ownership and do it now.